Randall, really good to see you. I'm glad we could finally make this work. I know we've played phone tag for the past, couple of months now, it seems like.
Great to be on with you, Ryan. I'm glad we
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah, me too. I think when we had talked a couple of weeks ago, if I remember correctly, I told you that I just watched Braveheart a couple of weeks ago with my two oldest boys. Did I tell you that?
You mentioned it, but I want to hear about it again.
Yeah, it was so good. I've got a almost 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, and mom was away, and I said, let's just watch Braveheart, And so we sat down, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. In fact, it is my favorite movie of all time. And it was so fun to watch them like yell and cheer and get mad at all the right and appropriate times. And I just thought, this is what they understand inherently what it means to be a man. And I think your character development just perfectly encapsulates what we're doing here, which is why I was looking forward to having this conversation.
Wow. Well, when I hear that from people I respect, and I hear it from strangers I don't yet know, but it makes me feel a kinship with them. Um, the sense that movie um, resonates with something universal in guys. There was a friend of mine who worked on the movie was telling me a story that he was doing a scout in Africa for another film, and he wanted to get permission from the chieftain of the Zulu to um, to shoot on Zulu territory. And he went to meet the chieftain, and the chieftain said, "No, you can't do it. It's not possible." And
Hmm.
so they sat down to talk, and the chieftain said, "What of the other movies have you worked on?" And just sort of making the Hollywood movie conversation. And
Sure.
my friend said, "I worked on Braveheart," and the chieftain jumped up and said, "That's the Zulu's favorite movie."
Oh, are you
And,
serious?
and gave him, and in a certain way, that one really rings the bell for me. The thought that here the Zulu, with their tradition of what it means to be a man, they're on the other side of the world, and they related to that movie strongly as well. He also gave him permission to shoot on the
That's what I was going to ask. So
Zulu
he was able to shoot.
territory.
He
He
was able to
was.
shoot on their land in that case.
Yeah. And I wasn't there, so I'm not sure of the full details of that story, but I believe it. And I also um, am moved, particularly now in this time of COVID and this time of fear, because so much of Braveheart is about brave hearts. And and I've been hearing it more and more lately of people watching it now. It might be that some of the guys who were much younger men when it came out, or maybe not even yet men, um, who who saw the movie and it shaped their manhood, and now they're using it to teach their sons, to share with their sons
Hmm.
what it means. Um, that seems to be happening more and more lately. I mean, manhood is certainly under assault. I suppose it always is, but it certainly is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the movie itself, that storyline is illustrated perfectly. That we have the powers that be that would love to subjugate those individual, strong, courageous, bold, capable individuals, and keep them as their subjects as opposed to their equals or individual citizens of their own lives and their own people.
Yeah, that's really intriguing to me. One of my friends said once that Hollywood likes to tout the story of the lone individual taking on the oppressive group.
Right.
Um, but as soon as any individual stands up like that, Hollywood does everything it knows how to do to crush him.
Hmm.
But I don't think that's just Hollywood. In a way, I I think that's a universal experience when the stalk of wheat that sticks its head up above the other stalks of wheat is, they say, the one that gets whacked off. Um, to to stand up as an individual, to find yourself, to say, this is who I am, no matter what it costs me to say that's who I am. I don't see how there's any life without that.
Mm.
Um, and yet I know there's a danger in it. That's why the brave part is in the equation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real risk to it. Even you, as you put out your work. So obviously, I'm familiar with Braveheart, and I knew that's part of the conversation we'd been having today. But it was interesting as I was looking through your resume, so to speak, and the amount of stories that you've written that have impacted my life. I think about Pearl Harbor and Man in the Iron Mask and The Passion of the Christ, and like all of these movies. You know, there's definitely uh, an undertone, I think, of the movies that I've seen you write, and it doesn't seem like these are popular narratives. So there's probably a lot of risk for you. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the movies that you write and direct and produce aren't the popular narrative that we see in Hollywood today. Is that right?
I think that's fair to say. And by the way, like, so I'm working on what we would take to be the sequel to the Passion of the Christ,
Oh,
and
Resurrection of the Christ.
resurrection,
That's
yeah, of the
right.
Christ, and which of course is I would call that the Mount Everest of all stories.
Mm,
Um, the most difficult, the most difficult to tell, the most challenging, the most frightening. Um, I think there are some ways in which it's the thing that frightens you most is the thing that you have to go out and face. You can't run. There's no escape from that. And I think that's been a characteristic for me throughout my life, to be afraid of a lot of things, but to think I've got to run toward what I fear. Um,
mm.
I I've been reading during this whole COVID quarantine. I got inspired by Jordan Peterson's lectures on Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew up Baptist, so I've read the Bible every day my whole life, and that inspired me to go back to the beginning and read it all the way through, and to see it as a whole story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm now into the Gospels now. I've been reading a lot. It's addictive if you start doing that. It's that is that is one mind blowing book, the Bible, and
It really is. It's interesting because let's strip just for a second, and I'm
yeah,
Christian as well, but let's just strip for a second the religious and spiritual undertone of the Bible itself. Just the stories alone and the messages and the morals and the lessons that can be learned and extracted, regardless of what your faith happens to be or your lack of, is can actually be a very, very powerful tool in every person's life. That's the power of story.
yeah, exactly right. And I loved Jordan Peterson's emphasis to say these stories have lasted because they are relevant in all cultures and across all times. And um, and that resonated with something I felt for a long time as a storyteller, which is that the audience is creating the story just as much as the storyteller is
Mm-hmm.
creating the story. What the audience is listening to, responding to, um, one of both of my sons, and I have three, and I believe all three of my sons will be storytellers. One of my sons said the best part of being a writer in his experience is that you get to be the first audience of the story. And wrapped up in that phrase is the sense that you're not you're not really creating the story. It's telling itself to you. It's finding its voice within you and your context, and you're breathing it out. And the way people respond is shaping you. And I'll give you an example. I have a friend, Jack Bernstein, and Jack is one of my oldest friends, and he's a writer. And our careers parallel each other. We started out about the same time. Um, I was a story editor on a television series, and I had to hire a staff, and Jack was the first person I ever hired, and he went on to write Ace Ventura.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Another
so,
one of our favorites in this household.
oh golly, I mean, and to have a friend like Jack is um, an incredible blessing. For one thing, on paper, he would seem to be completely different from me
Mhm.
in politics and in point of view. Um, and we sort of recognized a brotherhood from the very beginning. And he was the first person I showed the first draft of Braveheart to. And I believed, honestly, Ryan, that he was going to tell me, look, it's a mess.
Hmm.
Um, it's um, it's a there may be the kernel of something in here, but you've got a whole lot of work to even start to find the story. And
Right.
we sat down and he looked at we were for breakfast at a breakfast place we love to frequent, and he looked across the table and said, I think this is the best thing you've ever written.
Really.
And you could have knocked me over. And that to me speaks to that need that we don't live in a vacuum. Um, and also that incredible vulnerability you have of, thank God Jack Bernstein was there to say that um, he wasn't competitive, he wasn't um, offended that there was anything in the material that didn't match with
Hmm.
his thinking.
Sure.
um, he was like, there's something here, there's something terrific here. And we need that. We need the right person at the right time. I mean, Lennon and McCartney did it with each other, and the annals of writing are full of stories like that.
I can appreciate you talking about this because even in the context of this movement that we've created over the past 6 years, I see that as well. You know, when I started it as a hobby, and I've had so many wonderful opportunities to talk with men like yourself and other successful men. And at times I feel compelled and called to do this work, and that I'm not necessarily the quote unquote leader of the work that we're doing, that I'm the biggest recipient of it. And the work is helping me uncover things that I didn't know about myself, helping me to develop and mature and grow as a father and a husband and a business owner and community leader. And so I can definitely appreciate when you talk about the writer or the creator or the artist, we'll just say, being the biggest recipient or just the first audience, I think is the term you used, of the story that's being written. I can certainly see that in what's going on here.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about that, because I think what you're describing is kind of the way I find a story. So when you're shaping this, I suspect what you're doing is you're looking for what's relevant to your life, what you feel your life needs, what would excite you or inspire you or interest you. We look where we're interested, right? And in doing that, uncover surprises we didn't know. I mean, I would imagine that's how you look for what your content's going to be about, how you're going to shape what you're
Definitely.
doing to grow
Yeah.
it from nothing into this, right?
Yeah, I do. I look for opportunities that, like you said, that excite me, that interest me. I'm willing to try new things. And you talked about the level of vulnerability. When you put out your work, I I know what that feels like. I know you know what that feels like, but you're basically asking other people, like you were talking with Jack, I believe is his name, to judge me. Like, judge me, judge everything I think about, judge the way I write, judge the way I work, judge the way my mind works. That's a very difficult thing to do. So I can certainly appreciate that boldness and that courage. And then I can only imagine what it's like to know, you talk about the Zulu tribe, to know that that your work has directly and positively impacted millions and millions of people. That is amazing to me.
Yeah, that's a I I have to say it's overwhelming.
Mm,
Actually, it's like I can't really think about it very much. I found, Ryan, in the last few years, well, I have an 8-year-old son, and most people I meet think I'm his grandfather, and then when they find out I'm his dad, they apologize, and I go, look, in Tennessee, I would be his great grandfather. It's not, don't be embarrassed.
yeah,
But the the way children respond is without any filter, as
right.
you know.
Of
So
course.
so when you do something like you take your favorite movie and you show it to your sons for the first time, there's a level of vulnerability in that too, because there's got to be a part, whether conscious or unconscious, where you say, what if what matters intensely to me
Hmm.
doesn't speak to them at all? Where will
Interesting.
I go then? And I've had it happen. My 8-year-old loves music as I do, and all my sons love music. And I started my career with the goal of becoming a singer songwriter,
Hmm.
and um, and I still love music. I mean, as somebody I know once observed, that if music's in you, you never lose it. You never lose the bug, the desire. And um, and I still write songs, and I'll play them in my truck when we're out riding to breakfast or something. I'll listen to the mix and the the stereo,
Sure.
and if my son goes, "What's that?" I go, "Well, it's a song," and if he goes, "Turn it up," then it's a hit. For me,
You know it's good. You know you did good.
yeah, and it is not. And if he goes, "Can you turn that down so I can play Minecraft or whatever he's can you?" Then it's not a hit. And there's a certain immediacy about that. But for me to um, I've told this story before, but it's one of the most relevant to me about Braveheart. I hadn't done a screening of it in a long time, and a friend in Austin asked me to do a charity screening for the related to the Austin Film Festival, and
Okay.
rented a theater. And I have a print of the movie and went down and showed it, and I hadn't sat in a theater and seen it in 15 years or more. And so I watched it as an audience member, and then walked up on the stage to do a Q&A. And the first person who stood up was in the front row, a 19-year-old woman, girl, really, woman.
Sure.
And she stood
Young woman.
up,
Sure.
young woman, and she said, "Mr. Wallace, I don't have a question. I just want to tell you something. My fiance died 6 months ago.
Hmm.
And he told me before he died, he wanted me to watch Braveheart so I would understand the way he loved me." And that was one of the most overwhelming and powerful statements to me um, of a story that, in a way, I feel is mine and of me and from me, and in a way I feel is was far older than me and timeless, before me, and seems to go on after. And I got to be there when it came, and I got to speak it, and it rang, with other people. It rang with the actors, it rang with the director, it rang with the composer, and it and it and it got out into the world. And
Hmm.
I think that's, if I were to really think about it, the stories of chaos theory and how you get a wave because a butterfly flapped his wings in Indonesia, and that created a wave in Malibu or something. Um, I think all the things we do in our lives, we're just flapping the butterfly wings.
Hmm.
And and they make a ripple, and it's in the hands of God where they go.
How do you it's hard for me to actually even wrap my head around somebody not liking Braveheart and some of the other works that you have, but how do you deal with, well, you talked about your son when he's like, turn that down so I can play Minecraft, or knowing that there's people who don't actually appreciate your work. Is that something that you've had to contend with and wrestle with? And do you have ways of dealing with that, knowing that there's going to be people who don't appreciate it, don't like it, and don't, I don't know, for lack of a better term, validate, I guess. That's not the right word, but the work that you're doing, I think you understand.
I do, and you have you, you're really vulnerable as an artist, and I think we're all vulnerable in different ways. I mean, I'm not sure that there's anyone more vulnerable than a man who is in love with a woman and doesn't know how to tell her.
Hmm.
Um,
That's a good point.
it's and when I've taught screenwriting at different times, I always say to the class, the odds of you becoming a professional screenwriter, like making a living doing it, those are long odds. But the odds that you'll want to tell someone you love them, um, that's almost 100%.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to get at. And the vulnerability. I mean, I think the biggest thing we do in our lives is take care of that little flame inside us. Um, that's the one we have to nurture. And I came across the passage just the other day because, as I say in my Bible reading, I'm into the Gospels now, and when Jesus says, what does it profit you if you would gain the whole world and lose your own soul?
Hmm.
And that protecting that your soul is so vital. Well, where I find I have to do it is there's the daily nurturing that you do. I don't know who said it, but that it's what you do every day that shapes your destiny,
Right.
your daily habits. I'm a big one about daily habits, but there also become watershed moments. One of my mentors in school, his name was Thomas Langford, and he was dean of the divinity school at Duke. He was head of the religion department when I was a religion major there, and he was my mentor. And he said that when you reach a big decision in your life, you don't make it in a vacuum. You're really standing on all the other decisions you've made, on a lot of other little decisions that create a trajectory, and that trajectory points the way of what your decision's going to be.
Hmm.
And so I believe in all the little disciplines, all the little acts of courage you make every day, like getting up and making your bed and eating well and taking care of yourself and doing every little thing you can do to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, because time's going to come when you need your courage. And the big sort of critical times that I see are right before a movie comes out. There's a prayer that I habitually say,
Hmm.
and it's when I feel pretty desperate because I can feel my life hanging in the balance. I can feel my soul hanging in the balance. And it's not about what the world will think of my work. It's what I will think of what the world thinks of my
Hmm.
work.
How others
And
perceive you.
yes,
Hmm.
so I have to get on my knees and I have to pray to God Almighty that I won't make God out of what other people think, that I won't make God out of the box office or the critical response or what my friends say or any of that. And that's a hard one. It's a super hard one because we're wired to judge um, ourselves and our own behavior by what we're seeing reflected. But then there has to be that other deeper thing of, no matter what they say, this is who I who I believe myself to be. Before We Were Soldiers came out, and I had invested my own money in We Were Soldiers. I'd bought the movie
Mm.
rights with my own money. I'd put
Now, did you
years
write
into.
We Were Soldiers or direct you both of them
I wrote, directed, and produced.
and produced it? Okay.
Yeah, all of them. And I bought the book from uh, Lieutenant General Hal Moore and Joseph
Hmm.
Galloway. They had written this fantastic book, and then I was able to acquire the movie rights from them,
Okay.
and then I developed the screenplay, and my father passed away during the completion of that movie. And my father died on 9/11.
Mm.
And the hymn that's at the end of We Were Soldiers, called Mansions of the Lord, I wrote about 8 days after my father died. So
Oh, wow.
so there was a lot going on in that time for me. And when a few months later, when we were ready to test the movie for the first time, have the first public screening of it,
Hmm.
where you get feedback, and there are always these wannabe filmmakers, snarky little snots
Of
that
course.
that come to those things, and they love to see how they're like trolls, right? And they
Right.
want to see, you know, I want to enjoy graffiti on something, and they'll write, the awfulest comments, and the studio reacts to them like, "Oh gosh, somebody thought blah blah blah," and
Right.
you
Gives
do
it
that.
more credence than it actually deserves. Sure.
Yeah, and also there's the fact that you may get the main body of the audience just sort of shrugging and going, "Yeah, so what? I don't get it. It does, or I do get it and I don't care." I mean, so um, it was the day we were going to test the movie, and I called my mother because she had just lost my dad, and I was calling
Hmm.
her every day, and I said, "How are you, Mama?" And she said, "Well, I'm doing okay. How are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm good, but I'm really nervous today. We're going to test the movie." And she said, "Well, why does that make you nervous?" And I said, "Well, Mama, if you put your money and your blood and your sweat and your tears into something, and there are going to be people who just want to be critical, it makes you nervous." And my mother said, "Well, honey, if they crucified Jesus Christ, there are going to be some people that don't like you."
Just like mom would say, right?
That's like Mama would say. And it was one of the best things anybody ever said. It's like, to me, it was like it stays with me in pretty much every situation.
I think that's a great way to deal with it. Is it's the reality of the situation. Sometimes I catch myself hoping optimistically and a little bit delusionally that everybody will like what I say, because it just seems to me that these aren't controversial things I'm sharing or talking about, and inevitably I face pushback. But I've realized that the more we deal with it realistically, that you are going to face feedback negatively and trolls like you're talking about. Once you just accept that, it becomes less frustrating or painful to actually have to deal with it, because it is what it is, and you can just move on because you're going to be confronted with that.
Yes. And I think that I hadn't thought of this before, Ryan, but as you say that, it strikes me this might well be true. Um, I know that in my life, almost every really close friend that I have had, I've had a fist fight with.
Hmm.
Um, Not so much, as an adult, the fist fight becomes figurative, not actual, though in some cases it's been
Yeah.
actual. And 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 I noticed that there was something about the fact that the friend was willing to step up and fight, and I was willing to fight back, that made us understand something about each other and respect each other. Like,
Yes.
to know that, which to me is one of the most insidious things about the message that is sent to, particularly to young people, which is, don't tell us anything that we might not want to hear. Um, the term of microaggressions and
Mm,
safe spaces. And because when you get into warrior cultures, they they seek, they look for your most vulnerable points, and then they hit you there.
of course.
And that is it in a certain way is a show of respect. It's a test, certainly, but they don't do it thinking you're going to fold up and curl into a helpless ball. They're saying, we know how tough you are. We acknowledge it. We know you can,
Hmm.
you can take a shot in the solar plexus and you can give it back. And if we're going to go into battle, we want you standing beside us. Um, and and that's a thing that I think that I think we've lost. It's not to say to people, I I think of you as being so weak that I have to walk on eggshells around you. Um, well, I don't want to be around anybody like that. I don't want to be
Yeah.
around anybody that's trying to walk eggshells around me. As far as just, Bob Dylan wrote a song that I learned years ago, and the one verse was, um, "You see me on the street, you always act surprised. You say, 'How are you? Good luck,' but you don't mean it. When you know as well as me, you'd rather see me paralyzed. Why don't you just come out once and scream it?"
Mm.
and and now that's I mean, that's a genius Dylan
Yeah.
lyric,
Yeah.
but it sort of says, maybe if we actually would air out honestly what we're thinking to each other, we could find respect for each other. Now, I know there's a thing of, it's not necessarily good to, like when you go to therapists for marital counseling or couples therapy or something, some will go, well, let's just talk about the things you hate about each other. And others will say, well, let's start with what you love about each other. What
Sure.
drew you together. I mean, I, I'm not a psychotherapist. I don't understand the dimensions of that, but I do know that honesty is powerful, and the willingness to step up and go, I can be hit and I
Mm.
can keep moving. Boy, that's an incredible strength. That's certainly one that I want my sons to know, and I want to model for them as best I
Definitely.
can.
It reminds me of something I've thought about over the past several months. So about 2.5 years ago, I got heavy into jujitsu, and I've been doing that solid for, like I said, 2.5 years. And I love it for a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons that I really enjoy it is occasionally we'll have somebody new come. And it's interesting that those who can't humble themselves enough or get back in the fight will leave on their own accord. But because it's hard, it's difficult, it's humbling, it's humiliating in a lot of ways, it's physically excruciating. There's a lot of pain, mental and emotional and physical, that goes with it.
Yes.
But I know that any individual that can get into a physical altercation with me in a controlled environment and come back again after getting his butt kicked, or me getting my butt kicked and me
Right.
coming back, I want to know that those are the men I want to spend time with. Because and we may not ever face, in a lot of cases, and we've been fortunate in this way, but we may not face a violent or physical encounter. We may, but I just want to know that the guy next to me is tough enough to say and do the things that he may need to say and do when the rubber meets the road. And
Right.
that's who I'm looking for in a brother.
Yes. And in yourself.
Definitely. That's
And
what I'm trying to develop in myself.
that's right. So in a certain way, that practice is is brotherhood more than anything else. It's not, I mean, it's simultaneously an individual journey and a
Sure.
journey that you make together, because without those opponents, um, you can't find that. And
Hmm.
I'm into martial arts too, or always was. I'm not so much now. Now it's that fighting with my 8-year-old who just
Which can be just as
hyperventilate.
hard as anything else.
Oh man, yeah. As one of my buddies said, when he hits you, it's like you're getting hit with a frozen chicken. He's 8 years old, and he just. But
That's good.
I,
That's what you want. You want that
yeah,
as painful as it can be, right?
absolutely. But I think that what you said is profound. That's the way you're going through this pain, but the biggest part is whether you can show up and come back from it.
Hmm.
I started a few years back. Some friends invited me up to Laird Hamilton's house, and Laird Hamilton's the super surfer and
Just an incredible
fitness,
surfer.
and um, and he was doing a, a pool workout, which developed into what he and his wife Gabby call extreme pool training, but
Hmm.
they were also doing gym workouts. And I'm much better now, but I'm barely a swimmer. I'm a sinker, and it's terrifying. I mean, it's intimidating anyway to go out and you go, okay, I want you to pick up those 40-pound dumbbells and jump into the pool,
Mm.
and the pool's 11 feet deep, and like, well, I'm sorry,
What now?
these two things don't. And so there's that, and you realize that when if you keep coming back, then you see other new guys show up, and
Hmm.
that they're feeling what you felt, right? My first day in the gym, well, with this group of highly fit guys, they had said, okay, first thing before we start, everybody do 200 burpees.
Mm.
And I hadn't been doing burpees, and you can get winded after 20 or
Oh yeah,
so,
definitely.
and and I realized as I was, you do some, you catch your breath, you do some, you catch your breath. There are plenty of opportunities to quit,
Hmm.
but I realized that it was a test. It was like, okay, Mr. Hollywood, you want to come up here? Let's see how much you want it and how much you're willing to keep going. And when I finished the 200, I was in the group.
Right. You have a
Um,
seat at the table. You earn
I
that seat at the table.
I had a seat, and I love that. I that made me want to be there. And
Hmm.
there are some people that go, well, if it's going to be like this, and of
That's
course I
stupid. I
was,
don't want to do that. Right.
yeah, macho.
Yep.
It's all that. Of course,
Yeah.
it's every bit of that. But it was a group I wanted to be a part of.
Hmm.
And that test was part of why I wanted to be a part of. I didn't know that's what I was going to encounter, but I knew I was going to encounter stuff like that. And I think we shortchange people when we don't give them uh, an opportunity, because you don't give self-respect, you don't give esteem. That's something somebody has to find for themselves.
Right. They have to
Yeah,
earn that.
earn that. I think maybe you give them the opportunity for it.
Hmm.
But it's like in our modern day, and it's so easy to hammer this, but you know, everybody gets a trophy.
Hmm.
And heck, look, I coached t-ball, and I remember to this day, I remember when I was in the Pee Wee League in Memphis, Tennessee, at the church league, and I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, but I had made the team, and I wasn't happy with the position. I wanted to be the pitcher, and I wasn't the pitcher yet. And the but I remember walking by a kid, and the coach was telling him he hadn't made the team, and he was sobbing.
Mm.
And I've never forgotten it. Like, I don't want anybody left out. I
Sure.
I would have hoped, and I'm sure the coach that was telling him that was trying to figure out a way in himself to try to say, you're not big enough yet, or you're not skilled enough yet, but I'm going to work with you. That there would have been something like, okay, We've got the
Of course, you
guys that
hope.
get the uniforms, but if you want to play, you keep coming back here and I'm going to help you. That's what I tried to do with T-ball when I was there. But I think we lose something when you go, well, you got a trophy, even though you know at the
Hmm.
age of 6 or 7 that you didn't try, you didn't show up for practice, you didn't do anything. Your parents signed you up and they paid the fee, so you got the
Here's your,
here's your
yeah.
stuff. It's like, I'm not sure that's not the worst thing you can do for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I think about my coaches as I was growing up, and my mom, she raised me primarily on her own, but she always had me involved in competitive sports to her credit, because that was very important for me. And one of my favorite coaches, in fact, I still talk with him and we still have a great friendship nearly 20 years later now at this point. He cut me from the basketball team. He pulled me from my starting catcher position in baseball my senior year. I had other coaches grab me by the face mask and jerk me around and get in my face and yell at me, and others where all they had to do was look down in disgust and disappointment. These coaches were not easy on me at all. And yet these are the men that I have and hold in some of the highest regard of the men that I know, because they weren't easy on me. I always knew they cared, but that didn't mean that they were going to take it easy on me. In fact, they were, I think, rougher on me because they did care about what we did and how we performed.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I always wanted the rough coach too. And obviously we know that, well, I wanted the fair and the caring coach. And, um, but to me, caring meant strong and attentive,
Mm-hmm.
certainly
Yes.
not abusive. Because
No,
and
sure.
as I'm sure you did, I had coaches that I lost all respect
Oh yeah,
for.
you've got the coaches that
Um,
scream and yell and are just completely belligerent. That's different, of course.
right. And parents, I remember sitting in watching my nephew play a basketball game, and there was a parent sitting behind me, and he was clearly out of shape, and and I don't think had exercised a day in, the last 3 decades. And he
Right.
was screaming at his son for what his son should be doing and out on the court. And it was all I could do not to turn around and say, tell you what, at halftime, let's get out there, you and me, and you show your kid. I mean, not that I was any great shakes at ball, but I knew better than to yell at my nephew. Uh,
Right.
and but it's so tricky knowing what will work. You know, I read once, I think it was in a John Eldridge book, or maybe I heard a lecture
Hmm.
that he was giving, that when he said that fathers wound their sons without meaning to,
Right.
that everybody gets a wound, a, a, an- a comment that the father didn't mean to make, or didn't mean in the way the son took it, that the son feels he's being told by his dad he's not man enough to
Hmm.
to face life. And I remember before my oldest son went off to college. And how old are your sons?
I've got a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 4-year-old, and then I have a daughter in there as well, and she's eight. She will be turning 8.
Oh wow. One of my buddies has 2 sons and a daughter, and he told me his
Hmm.
his wife said we ought to have one more to even it out. And he said, then we need another son to even
Yeah,
out the one
that's a
daughter.
good. That's a great way to put it. That's
So
so
we got
true.
our handful with her.
That's so true.
But the when your sons get ready to go off to college, or your children do, that's a big. I think particularly the sons going off is a big day for dads. Probably the equivalent for daughters might be her wedding day. Um,
Sure.
uh, and I remember from my father anyway, when my sister got married, that was a deep and complex day.
Hmm.
And for me, when my oldest son was about to go off to school, I was praying, and I I asked God what God wanted me to do about my son. What should I? How
Yeah.
should I be with my son? And it's funny. I've never thought of God as the Oracle of Delphi. That you just go and say, okay, here's a problem. Tell me what to do, or here's here's my to-do list for you. So get busy,
Yeah,
God.
get this taken care
Al-
of for me.
Although I succumb to those things all the time, but consciously I know that that's not quite how it's supposed to be. But I did actually ask God a question, and I waited and listened, and immediately I got a sense, like a clear, of course, not an audible voice, but I got a clear voice uh, that said, trust him. And I
Hmm.
immediately began to argue with that. And I was like, what do you mean, trust him? I
Trust God or trust your son?
trust my son.
Got it.
Like I felt God was saying to me, trust your son. And I started to argue back with God to say, I don't, because it was such a clear message. I felt I needed to argue. I mean, it was clear. It was clear what I was hearing. It's like, this doesn't make sense. I trust my son more than anybody trusts his son. What are you talking about? I don't get. And then suddenly I went, no, I don't.
Hmm.
All I've been doing ever since I realized the time was coming for him to go off to school is to be giving him advice. I'm saying, now watch out for this. Now be sure you do that. Now, a good way to organize your day would be a good, and and what I'm really telling him is, I don't trust you. I don't think you're ready.
Yeah.
If I thought you were ready, I wouldn't be doing it. It's like that scene in The Godfather when Don Corleone is talking with Michael, and he goes, I keep going over this Bazzini business. You're going to be assassinated. It's going to work this way. And it's an incredible scene.
Right.
And as virtually every scene in that movie is incredible. And the message is, I don't think you're ready.
Hmm.
And what that immediately answered prayer was for me was, let your son let your son go. Trust him because he is ready. And let him know he's ready. He's he's going to encounter things he's he didn't see coming,
Right. Of course. Sure.
but he is ready to deal with those things. And of course he was.
And that is really John Eldridge talks about that a lot. That, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says that every man is looking to answer the question, am I enough? Right? Am I
Mhm.
capable? Am I a man? And so we're looking for ways to prove it. And I think we're looking for that validation from our fathers as well. Do our fathers honor and recognize us as being man enough to handle whatever may come our way?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, I have to credit John Eldridge for that prayer. I had listened to him speak at a friend's house, and he had said, if you want to do something scary, get down on your knees and ask God what he thinks of you.
Hmm.
And it was, I had come directly home and done that. And before I asked God what he thought of me, I asked him what I should do about my sons first. Now that's me giving Eldridge credit. I also, at that very night, I had read his book, Wild at Heart,
Such a great book.
and I went up and said, John, I'm Randall Wallace, and I wrote Braveheart, and you quote it a whole bunch of times. In every case, you say William Wallace says this and William Wallace says that. Well, William Wallace never said any of that. I did.
You said it. That's
Yeah.
right.
How
That's right.
about I give credit to the guy that wrote it? And he laughed and said, yeah, you're right.
That's a good
Um,
point because I've quoted William Wallace too, and I'm going to have to change that now that you say that and say Randall Wallace says.
hey, listen, now you get me on my high horse. So it's on the wall of the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado. um, they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. And under it is William Wallace. Well, William Wallace did not say that.
Oh, that's good. No, that's so true. And it is, you bring up an interesting point because I know, and you're not related to William Wallace, correct?
I believe I am. I
Okay.
absolutely believe, but that's one of those assertions like, saying this doesn't cause cancer.
Right,
Like
right,
nobody can prove it, right?
right.
But there's no known
Hmm.
way of getting William Wallace's DNA, or there are only a couple of pictures in Scotland that they think might be likenesses of him. There are no records of his descendants, um, but I am convinced in my bones
Mm.
that I'm related. But that's just strictly I would call it
Yes.
the spiritual sense.
Yeah, and I feel that too about things. I almost wonder as you say that if you were, meant to tell his story. I guess the question is how much, with as limited information that we have about William Wallace, how do you decide which liberties to take in this telling of his story?
Um, Man, that's a great question. So I have a I have a practice that really troubles people, especially teachers of writing and research oriented people. Um, and I think it troubles them because um, I understand the notion that we can't make up our own facts.
Mhm. Of course.
But the problem in that is that we all can look at exactly the same thing and see entirely different
Right.
things based on our values and our prejudices. Um, so I don't the kind of classic academic way, the way even writing is taught in school, maybe not so much creative writing, but the way it was taught when I was in school was the teacher would want you to do an outline, and there would be a format. And my 8-year-old is even being taught some of this now
Mhm.
of what's your opening? Who are your characters? What is the character's arc? What they don't use that for 8-year-olds yet, but what's his challenge, or
Mhm.
and what's the ending like, and how do you sum up and all this? And they want to have a cookbook of how to write a story. And I find this absolute worse than nonsense. I
Mm.
think it's now,
Because why? It doesn't allow for the creativity, or what is it
yeah,
that you have a hard time with about that?
a, a great story is not, you don't get to a good story by following the rules.
Mm.
So by giving rules, I mean, the first thing I would write on the blackboard when I was teaching screenwriting, and I love to teach screenwriting, but I would write, here are the rules. There are no rules.
Okay,
Um,
interesting.
but it's interesting to know the rules. It is important to know the rules. But I think you have to start with the notion of, we're talking about finding, like we talked about earlier, what moves you, what what is there in you that gives you that makes you more fully alive.
Mhm.
um, when people ask me what I'm looking for in a story, I remember standing in a church with my family and several hundred other Baptists, and Baptists sing. They are the high octane religion and sing at the top of their lungs. The minister of music would not face the choir in the Baptist churches I grew up with. He would face the
Face the
congregation. The
congregation.
choir knew the song.
Sure.
He wanted the congregation to be singing it, and it would give me, and we sang hymns written by Beethoven and Bach and Handel, and lyrics written by John Wesley and
Mm.
Charles Wesley, and the great lyricists, and and it would give me a surge of life. And I wanted people, when they watched my work, to feel that surge of life. I wanted, and the way for me to feel it was to feel it myself. So that to me was the first thing I want to know about writing, and the first thing I want to share with people about writing, when they'll say, well, I want to go to film school. And I'll say, oh, study history, study literature, study economics, study science. Having something to write about is the most important. If you have it to write about, you can figure out how to tell the story, but it's the why that dominates the how of the story. So for a story like Braveheart, I wouldn't go and do research first. First of all, there was no research to be done.
Right.
There's no history about it to speak of. It Encyclopedia Britannica is a tiny entry about William Wallace, and says that his story continues to inspire his people to this day, but it's shrouded in legend. So what I always do is say, I would not be attacking this story. I wouldn't be aware of it to write it if it hadn't spoken to me on some level. And what was it about that story that spoke to me? When I heard about William Wallace, it was, I'd walked into Edinburgh Castle, and I had just come upon a statue of William Wallace. And I was with my pregnant wife, who had Mormon ancestors and knew her family's complete history, and I didn't know mine.
Sure.
And here was a guy named Wallace. So I said to a member of the Black Watch, who is this Wallace? And he went, "A greatest hero." And I went, "Hey, honey," I'm elbowing my pregnant wife, "greatest hero.
You hear this? You hear that?
You hear this, honey? Wallace, greatest hero of Scotland."
That's right.
And not exactly a country of wimps. And so there was a statue of Robert the Bruce flanking the other door. And I said, and their dates were overlapping. So I said, well, was Wallace an ally of Robert the Bruce in fighting the English? And he said, no one knows for sure, which of course are the magic words that any writer wants to hear.
Of course.
But our legends say that Robert the Bruce may have been among the ones who betrayed William Wallace so as to clear the way for himself to become the king. And then it was like a lightning bolt had struck me, Ryan. It was like hearing that St. Paul and Judas were the same person. What if something so noble in the life and death of William Wallace had been what transformed Robert the Bruce from being someone who would betray his country's greatest hero into becoming his country's greatest king? And that seemed like a story. So I sat down and wrote that, not knowing whether they used crossbows or longbows, not knowing whether they had invented glass for the windows yet or any of those things. And I didn't worry about those details. I wanted to know what would I have wanted to hear if I was a Scottish soldier on that battlefield and we're facing 3-to-1 odds and our leadership is incompetent and corrupt, and suddenly William Wallace rides out on that battlefield. What could he have said that would have made me want to stay? And that's how
I love it. I mean, I think about what you're saying, and whether we're talking about a story like William Wallace and Braveheart, or we're talking about, maybe we're just swapping hunting and fishing stories. we always tweak the details, maybe just a little bit, in order to deliver a message. I mean, that's the point. Deliver a message. I'm a better fisherman than you. I'm a better hunter than you. Or,
yes.
but I also think, I look at the characters that I'm inspired by, whether they're fictitious or real characters throughout history. And it's the reason I'm inspired by them is not because every little detail is spelled out, but because I can see a little bit of myself in those individuals and the things they do well, and also the things that they struggle with.
Right.
And that's why even Robert the Bruce in the movie is somebody who, you can relate with. He has ambitions. He has desires, worldly ambitions and desires. And yet he has also a desire to lead people, a desire to do right, to be inspirational, to live a virtuous life in spite of his worldly ambitions. It's something that I think all of us see in ourselves.
Yes. And in so many ways, I think I saw myself in Robert the Bruce more than in any of the other characters.
Hmm.
And when I'm writing, I see myself in all the characters.
Sure.
Um,
Right.
but um, but I really, I would love to be William Wallace and know who to love and who to fight and whose head to cut off and who to go save if I could. Um, but there's a lot of Robert the Bruce in me where I'm looking for, I'm calculating, and um, and that's another reason why, like, the Jesus story is so, resonant is a pale word. Um, if um, if you look at Golgotha on the day Jesus was crucified, and you took a snapshot of it and you said, who's the winner in this picture? You wouldn't be likely to say the guy hanging on the cross in the middle
Of
there.
course.
But but the that was the path to victory.
Hmm.
And and it is finished, um, are three of the it is finished and I love you. Maybe those are the same words. Um, but it, yeah, so
I got to
you
think
know,
on that one, but that's really interesting. You'd say that because that is an interesting thought. It is finished and I love you. The ultimate sacrifice has been paid, which is an expression of love for sure.
right, right. And it's like, how much do you want it? I think it was, not to lurch between quoting Jesus and quoting Vince Lombardi, but Vince Lombardi is supposed to have said, the more you sacrifice, the harder it is to surrender.
Hmm.
And I do believe in sacrifice, and it's of course hard to make it. Um, every morning when I get up, there's a part of me going, gosh, you lazy bastard, get up and
Of
get at
course. I
it,
think we all have that, right?
get at it, right? And but I do think that when there's something to finding what you're willing to sacrifice for. What you, but part of the sacrifice is not knowing. If you knew, like, I remember hearing a sermon when I was a kid that Jesus could look up and see armies of angels ready to come down and pull him
Hmm.
off the cross if he asked for them. And there are even references in the Bible that suggest that. But my thought was, when Jesus said, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He meant that, of course, he was in fact quoting the Old Testament, but he I think he felt forsaken and
Hmm.
alone, and that makes it even more. Seeing it that way for me makes it more resonant. And there are times we don't know, like when you started doing this, like from nothing, you had to think, well, I don't know where this is going to go. And sure, there's a chance that I'm going to invest my time, my effort, my money. I'm going to
Hmm.
buy equipment. I'm going to take part of my all of my resources. I'm going to, who knows where it's going to lead. We don't know. If you knew, it wouldn't be a sacrifice.
Right. That's a good point. And the thing I've talked about in the past, and this pales in comparison to, the story of Christ and some of these other stories we're talking about, but I look at Superman as a superhero. It's like, is he really super? Like,
Yeah,
there's no
exactly.
risk. But you take
Exactly.
somebody like Batman, for example, who's
Yeah.
immortal, who can die.
Right.
That is more courageous to me than somebody who has no risk. They might engage in the same activity, but the one who took the greater risk is the one who's more bold and more courageous.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. If bullets bounce off you, then how are you being courageous? I think
Right.
I know Henry Cavill, who
Mm-hmm.
was fabulous Superman, an
Yeah.
incredible guy. I mean, just an awesome individual and actor. And I think they were wise to in telling that story to have to make the risks be emotional and in what I would call spiritual. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
do you are you do you become a whole man if your challenge is to find not your superhero-ness, but in a certain way to find your vulnerability, to find your humanity. Um, and that's because I've had exactly that same observation. There was a great episode of Kung Fu. You may be too young to have watched it, but knowing
Yeah, I
martial
haven't.
arts, well, so the conceit of the story was that um, a guy who was, I think, maybe son of missionaries or something, but he was half Caucasian and half Chinese, and he
Mm-hmm.
lived in China, and he becomes a Shaolin monk, and he's able to do amazing things. But at one point, in one of the episodes, he's shot. He gets, I think he was shot with an arrow from behind or something, but he's lying bleeding, and a boy who has admired him and seen him do all these incredible martial arts things is laughing and is not upset. The boy loves him,
Mm.
or the boy at least admires him. But the boy's saying, "Oh, don't worry. He's fine. It's a trick. He, he knows how to wave his arms and make this go away." And the Shaolin monk grabs him by the collar and pulls him close and says, "It's not a trick. It's a
Mm.
price that has been paid." And that um, I don't want free stuff. I want to pay the price, because I think it's in paying the price that the object becomes worth something to you.
Mm.
Um, Another thing my mother said to me: everything worth having is worth what it took you to get it.
Hmm. Man, that's so good. That is so good, especially in this day and age where we just want everything handed to us on a silver platter. The real value comes from working and earning it.
Yeah, yeah,
Can you tell me a little bit about that sword? We started talking about it, I think, before we hit record, but can you tell me a little bit about that sword behind you there?
yeah. So that's a Scottish claymore, and it's emblematic of the Scots,
Mm-hmm.
and the way they fought in the time of William Wallace. When I first saw it, having seen other swords, um, I thought it was meant to be held in one hand, and
Mm-hmm.
the the Scots, the fighters, laughed at me and said, "No, no, this is it's a stabbing weapon." So the
Mm.
Scots had adapted from the Romans the schiltron. It was called a sort of, the Romans fought in squares, and the
Okay,
Scots
right.
were adapting that. And so you would have a wall of shields, and then you would plunge
Mm.
the sword, so it wasn't swung as much as stabbed. So it was like a half sword, half spear, and it was short enough to be used in that way. And um, so and then the Clan Wallace in Scotland, well, they love tartan. They have tartan in everything, and they'd given me a swatch of tartan, which I wrapped around it and put it on my mantle.
Is
And
is the pattern indicative of their particular clan?
yes,
Okay, that's what
yes.
I thought.
Now that is the called the Wallace tartan, and the different families in Scotland. There are books which were pretty much codified by, as I understood the story, There were traditional patterns woven within the different regions. And they didn't, in the days of William Wallace, they didn't have this deep scarlet
Mm,
dyes. That's why in the movie, the Wallace tartan, which was really developed by one of our costume designers, kind of extrapolated, if you will, or he went backwards to try to figure out what would that tartan have looked like
got it.
in those days. But the story is there were a couple of kind of alcoholic Scottish brothers who one long winter in the Highlands ensconced themselves in their castle and decided they would um, codify, they would make a book of all of the different tartans that related to the different clans.
Hmm.
So that's how
That's
that
interesting.
came.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's so much history. My wife and I were in England about a year and a half or so ago, and we went into, if I remember correctly, as we were going to go through the Parliament tour, we were able to go into and it had a plaque and it said, this is where William Wallace was, tried and convicted. So to be able to
Yes.
see that, even just little things like that are so fascinating to me. And that castle is, or that hall, I guess it was, is probably, well, it's probably more than a thousand years old.
Oh yeah. It was haunting to me to stand in that place, go through Westminster Abbey and all the
Mm-hmm.
different. Then there's a place called St. Bart's Hospital, St. Bart's, I believe it's called, and it's in Smithfield, which is a part of London that's maybe 20 miles or something, or
Mm-hmm.
but it's it's away from where he was tried, and it's where he was dragged through the streets and then killed there. There's a plaque on the wall there.
Mm.
To to go to that spot you're describing was really powerful for me because that is where he stood, and to think, well, he looked up at those windows. Is, he was standing here saying, you can take my life, but you won't take my freedom. You 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 can condemn me to death, but I never swore to be your servant. I
Mm.
never swore to be your vassal. Um, I mean, that was powerful stuff for me.
That is
So
powerful.
whatever the actual words were, that's what the message was.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying, is this is the price that needs to be paid, and he was willing to pay that price.
yes.
Yeah. Well, Randall, I appreciate our time. What an honor for me to be able to have this conversation. I'm going to tell my boys about it because they were excited we were going to have this conversation. And I know the men listening, I know the overwhelming majority, if not all of them, are to varying degrees deeply impacted by your work and your creativity and everything that you've done and put out there. So we really appreciate you and everything that you've done with your life.
Oh, Ryan, thank you so much. An honor for me to be on with you. I was thrilled to get a chance to do this with you. So thank you. Hope we can do it again.
Yeah, we definitely will. Thank you, Randall.
Thank you, brother.